Hello and welcome to the Michael Mama Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, coming to you from Mount Soma in the mountains of western North Carolina, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple. I'm here today with Scott Davalos. Adrian's not with us today because her son, Joshua, is graduating from high school. So she'll be back next week, and congratulations to Joshua and everybody else who will be graduating this spring. And today, we're going to be doing to me, which is just probably one of the most important podcasts we could do. And it's about language's most important term and its bounty. And so we're going to get into that. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about Sanskrit and what it is and where it came from. You know, it's interesting because if you look at the study of linguistics, it certainly seems to me they've got it all wrong. They a lot of times they say that the Romance languages or in Europe, and that's where the language came from first, and then it migrated through the Middle East to India. And so Sanskrit is based on that. But if you look at the Vedic literature and you realize how old it is, that's not what happened, And there's a very clear and compelling rationale to why it went the other way around. Sanskrit is a language of nature, the language of nature. Now, what do we mean by that? The only thing that exists, as I've said, is consciousness. Consciousness perceives itself as other and does like a double take, like when you're brushing your teeth in front of the mirror and you catch your own reflection. For a minute, you think there are two people there. Really, there's just one. So consciousness becomes conscious of itself and perceives it as other. And then consciousness becomes aware of those two things. And so a third thing is born, consciousness aware of those two. So now you have three things, consciousness becomes aware of those three, a fourth thing, and boom, 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 it cascades out to infinity. And it's lively, it's dynamic. It just doesn't happen and it's static. It's a self-interacting dynamic of oneness. Everything is born out of the same one thing. And you'll see that in a lot of different religions and that, but this is kind of like the mechanic of it, you see. Now, in the manifestation process, there's a sequentiality to the manifestation, and it comes from sound, and it births what we call the Veda and Vedic literature. You could say that the Veda itself exists actually in pure consciousness before it manifests. And so that's why they distinguish between Veda and Vedic literature. Vedic literature is kind of like manifestations that can be derived from the Veda. All this is very deep, and it's a field I love, and we go all into it, Shruti, Smriti, all of that. But for now, what we're going to say is that there's a self-interacting dynamic and that it emerges into relativity, sequentiality, even though within the absolute, within the transcendent, that's beyond time. There's no time. And so there is no sequentiality in that sense. It's all simultaneity. So at the essence of every point in creation, in fact, what's the essence of every point in creation? Pure consciousness, oneness, pure isness, the only thing that exists. And so you could say that at every point in creation, if you follow it to its depth, at every point in creation is the totality, all knowledge. Why do we say all knowledge? Because everything was birthed out of that. I am that, thou art that, all of this is nothing but that. So contained in the seed of everything, every point in creation, is the totality of all knowledge. But now when we take that simultaneous, or that simultaneity within the transcendent, and we emerge it into relativity. It's like we can go into the structure of space and time. I give lectures about that. But anyway, it's like that simultaneity kind of gets spread out over the face of time and becomes sequentiality. So there's a sequence to it. And the sequence is just the sequence of the emergence of multiplicity from oneness. And what is the sound of multiplicity? Ah. It's like fully open throat. See, it even maps onto the physiology. Why? Because everything comes from it. The physiology is one with it. You can find in different things, this microphone, different things, everything somehow emerges through that sequentiality. But let's speak specifically now in terms of language, and specifically Sanskrit and what it is. So is like pure consciousness before it even becomes aware of itself. But then when consciousness perceives itself as other, like brushing your teeth and catching your reflection in the mirror, when consciousness perceives itself as other, duality is born. There's now not just the notion of isness, but the notion of other. So goes to full stop in the throat. G. The negation, you can say, of Now we have duality, the opposite. So g. And then that whole thing unfolds, sequentiality. Agni mile purohitam. And that sequentiality of simultaneity as it emerges into relativity, you see, that is the Veda. So it's the sounds, the sequential sounds of the self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness. Now, there's a language to that. But right there, it gets kind of, see, it's a language, but every syllable, every word in that language is pregnant with with the knowledge of the totality of all that is. And so that's what a pure language is. A pure language is a language that emerges from the very nature of the fundamental quality of existence, self-interacting oneness, and then unfolds sequentiality. But again, it exists transgradiently. In other words, there's different levels of understanding, an infinite number of levels of understanding when you go from the depth to the subtle relative to the more and more superficial relative, all the way out to the physical, you see? So what we can do is we can take one slice through that transgradient pie, if you will, and then we get different meanings. And there's a guy, his name was Brigu, and he assigned one meaning to it. He was a great seer, but he assigned just took one level. And, it goes, I adore Agni, and, then you get the Samaveda and all the different Vedas. And it reads like, for lack of a better word, a story, okay? But they're just one slice through the pie. Now, that's the Veda. It's self-interacting, it's lively, and it's the underlying basis of all the existence. Everything is built upon that. But now, where did we get it? How did we find it? It's an interesting thing, because if you ask people who are really into it and you ask them where the Veda came from, a lot of them will just say, the rishis. And then I would ask, where did the rishis get it? And they don't know. And so that is the one term, the one word that, to understand this is transformational. It's a key, it's a gateway to the value of Sanskrit language, which is the language of the Veda, and it's also the gateway to the Veda. And now what you're doing when you understand Sanskrit is that you're interfacing with a very fundamental level of existence. Okay? So that process where the rishis got it, that process is called cognition. Cognition, that term, that one word, if you really understand it, and don't just understand it, but embrace it, really see, you can get something intellectually, and that's nice, but it's a nice beginning, all too often mistaken for the goal. Oh, okay, I get cognition, I get the Veda, so I get, no. It's when you find it in yourself and you find the truth of it deep within yourself. But cognition itself is a very, very rare and very subtle thing. Cognition was done, the Vedic cognitions were done by the rishis. And the rishis were individuals that were actually manifestations into human form, if you will, but they were manifestations, at least one aspect of them, it was a manifestation into relativity, into what we would say is a human body. But the rishis are operators within creation. So we're talking about some pretty serious people here, some pretty profound people. And the thing about the rishis is their physiology was so refined, so delicate, so sublime, all the way down into the transcendental level of existence, that the self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness flowed through their physiology at the depth of their being and emerged transgradiently, undistorted, untainted, uncompromised, out the vocal cords, and actually all the five senses, but out their vocal cords. And people heard that, realized it was incredible, memorized it. It's called the Veda. And they didn't want to lose it. They realized that the rishis were giving us was something very precious. So they actually started pundit schools. Pundit schools were like people memorized it and then they trained other people to memorize it. And those people are called pundits. And it's been passed down through the generations. We have a pundit at our temple, Pandit Prasad, and he's very knowledgeable in the Veda, you see. They start learning that from their age 5. And it's interesting because when Pandit Prasad first came to the United States, he spoke not a word of English. In 6 weeks, you could have a conversation with him, and it's like he spoke for a long time. And why? The reason why is because the foundation of all language, of all things, is the Veda. So the language of the Veda, which he knew, which he knows, is fundamental to all languages. And so you already got the root of English or any language, and so it becomes a lot easier to learn to speak that language. The Veda is like that. There's Vedic mathematics, and it enables people very easily to add very huge numbers and do incredibly complex mathematical calculations just in their head with ease. Why? Because it's consistent with the nature of the human physiology. You see, our physiologies are rooted, just like everything else, our physiologies are rooted in the Veda. You see? And if we could just understand that and really embrace it, then it inspires us to look to the Vedic knowledge. And if we also understand that it exists transgradiently, then we don't get simplistic with it. We don't say, oh, okay, I know the story of Shiva and Parvati, and I know all these different stories, so I get the Veda. No. You don't ever really get the Veda, but the more refined your physiology is, the more you become one with it in the depth of your being. And that doesn't mean the degree to which you're capable of feeling into your depth now. It means the very depth of existence itself. Now, the human physiology, and this is important, the human physiology has the ability to traverse all the different levels of existence, from the gross physical to the energetic, the psychodynamic, and all the way down into the celestial and the transcendental. So it's all has the ability to function on all those different levels. But when the physiology isn't refined, what happens is we go to a certain level and we feel like that's the depth of our being. And largely it's highly emotional for a lot of people. And it also can be compromised, if you will. Compromised in the sense that if we have stresses and strains in our awareness and the subtlety of our being, then there become distortions. And that's the whole field of psychology. It talks about our wounds, our distortions, our preconceived notions, all of that. And that's largely what I'm talking about here. So let's talk a little bit more, well, about what the Veda has. See, the Veda, all knowledge is in the Veda. And if you look into the Vedic literature, it talks about how far away the nearest star is, the circumference of the earth. And this goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. In fact, the Veda is eternal. And so Vedic cognition came from way, way, way back, And a lot of times if you read, studies, they say, oh, well, this part of the Veda was created, this long ago, 3,000 years or whatever, another this, 2,000 years, whatever. That's all wrong. The Veda is eternal. That's what they're accounting for, is just when they found the latest, probably written record of it. In the Veda, there's also instructions, all these incredible things we see. How did they build those temples? How did they do all these different incredible things that we can't even fathom how they did today? The root of it all, the root of how they built the pyramids, flying machines. They talk about all of that, in detail. The trouble with okay, why don't we just read there and figure out how to build a flying machine? Well, some of those things, again, you can take a slice through the pie, but the real knowledge of it goes deeper, deeper, deeper. That's why we're so fortunate to have the cognitions of Mamuni Mayan. He's a rishi, and he gave us the instructions of how to build an enlightened city. An enlightened city is a place that radiates out the purity of the transcendent on all levels of existence. And fortunately, we have Stapati's Vedic architect, who has found those cognitions of Mamuni Mayan and has given them to us in their purity. So that's what we're about. We're going to build that, because what that does, you see, is it refines and purifies the physiology of all the people in the environment. And by virtue of that, we start to live in harmony with all the laws of nature and heal the whole planet. You see, it's a little bit like, well, what's the word? Dross, or, on one level, it's ama. Ama is like, in the physiology, ama is like, gunk. The physiology gets kind of cruddied up a little bit, kind of like you have to brush your teeth or it accumulates tartar. Well, like that, tartar is kind of like a dross, you could say. And so the whole physiology has some dross. And by meditation, even your speech and what you eat and all these different practices, the physiology can be refined and purified, and the dross is expelled. And so then we live more and more in harmony with nature, and we start coming from deeper and deeper places within our being, you see. Now, one thing to say about the language of nature is this word mantras, and we know different mantras. What are mantras? Mantras are kind of like, they can be just a syllable, or they can be a phrase, Om is a mantra. Om Namah Shivaya is a mantra. Some of the mantras are rather long, and then there are Vedic chants that are composed of mantras. And so what we have with these mantras are very powerful tools that can be used in different ways. They can be used to purify the dross out of the physiology. But also we need to respect the power of mantras. Different mantras have different influences. And, so thinking, oh, it's a mantra, it's great, you want to use it, that's a little bit like going into a pharmacy and saying, oh, it's all medicine, so I'm just going to eat one of each. No. It depends on the nature of your physiology and what would best harmonize and serve your physiology in the moment. There are mantras that are for different physiology types, so that even when your physiology was, let's say completely pure and everything, there are mantras that are inherent to the uniqueness of your nature. And there are those that are not, so that those that are not would never be right for you to, meditate on or what have you. So the whole thing is a very profound and very subtle and very important science.
Michael, can you talk about, like, I think the difference in the English language, and then you see the power of prayer, and maybe talk about that and how that's different, or what the benefits of that, or how.
Yeah. So different languages have different levels of purity. And the purer the language, the more in harmony with nature it is, the more powerful it becomes. Now, prayer then, we can, again, everything exists transgradiently. We can pray on more superficial levels or more profound levels. And a lot of that has to do with the nature of our physiology. It doesn't matter, in that sense, what language. An individual who speaks any language can come from a place within that is living in harmony with nature. And so then what happens is when we speak our language, it kind of like tumbles and translates. And as it goes deeper and deeper in our physiology, then it kind of like, what would we say, transmutes in a sense into a language of nature, the language of nature. And in that sense, then you don't even have to know Sanskrit. It helps. Why? Because then it's coming, you're working on that deep level, and it's purifying the dross out from the depth of your being, even deeper than you can currently perceive. But it doesn't have to be. There are enlightened people who don't speak Sanskrit, but now, let's say we live in an environment where the dross doesn't exist, not only in us, but no pollution, the atmosphere, everything is completely pure. Well, then we can call it theory if you want. Then the theory is that if you take a word like pushpam, means flower. If you take a word like flower and you think it and hold out your hand, a flower will manifest, There's a whole thing, Maharishi Patanjali and his Yoga Sutras. Those are technologies of Sanskrit, technologies of the unified field, technologies of the Veda, whereby all sorts of, supernatural powers, you think of it, and it's a possibility. Life is a field of all possibilities. And the only limitation is, we could say it different ways, the dross in our physiology, our identity with preconceived notions, the limitations of our awareness. Really, all that's the same thing, So we don't want to get too, I would say, arrogant about the idea that, oh, well, you don't speak Sanskrit, so you're not enlightened. No, that's just not it. There's so much to say. I'm trying to decide. I can go in so many directions with this. Suffice it to say that what we want to do here, what our purpose is here, for a long time, I thought, oh, there's so much knowledge. I want to give this. Oh, I got to say this. Oh, I got to do that. Even I used to teach hands-on healing. And for a while, I was thinking I got to write a book. encyclopedia of hands-on healing techniques, how to heal this, how to heal that. I was getting incredible results, you know. But then I realized something. I realized that the book would be meaningless, even though it would be so valuable. What do I mean by that? Until your physiology and your awareness, your state of being is living on a level where that book would make sense, it wouldn't work. It'd fall on deaf ears. But if a person was living on that level, then they wouldn't need the book because they'd already know it. You see? See, knowledge doesn't come from outside. Real knowledge, the kind of knowledge I'm talking about. Now, we can gain knowledge from outside, but that's kind of like knowledge with a small k. I'm talking about knowledge with a capital K. In the West, our whole orientation is to gain knowledge from observation, from outside, to be given things, to be taught things. Vedic knowledge is though it includes that, what's even more important is it includes the knowledge that comes from going to the depth of your being, where you are one with the home of all knowledge, and functioning from that level, where you are one with all knowledge. Now, somebody says, well, does that mean that if I ask somebody who's living that level how many elephants there are in Africa, they could tell me? See, that's an interesting thing. It doesn't look like that. That's too Hollywood. We all have our life's purpose. We all have our dharma, our role, if you will. It's our nature. It's not like it's prescribed to us. It's just our nature. And we live life, when we're enlightened, we live life in accord with our own true nature. And it doesn't look like Cecil B. DeMille's depiction of Jesus in the Ten Commandments or whatever, Ben-Hur or whatever it was. It looks very natural. But why? Because it is natural, you know? Anything else on that, Scotty? Was that responsive?
Yeah, it is. I think, for a lot of people, they're going to be like, well, how it is that that this is you know what I mean? It's just like one of those things, just I think explaining the mechanic of the difference of the
It's a good question. Like,
yeah.
What makes you think that you're right? And yeah.
Right.
Here's the thing I will say about Vedic knowledge, and it's a great question. It's a little bit like, I like to use the analogy like with a math teacher. You might be a little kid and okay, 2 + 2 = 4, and okay, you get that, and then multiplication is a little harder, but eventually you get it. And then long division, and it's kind of like, I can't, no, this is no good. And you might even reject it and say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But then you work, and you start to understand it. And as you go forward, at some point, you realize that this guy knows more than I do. Why? Because everything works. It all fits together. It's so incredible. And like Vedic knowledge is like that, only exponentially more profound. And as you study it, provided you don't take a simplistic perspective of it, I memorized the Puranas, I memorized this, I memorized, 1,000 names of Vishnu, whatever, and that's all very good. But the thing is, you can get stuck on that level too. And as long as you don't do that and you go deeper, it takes you deeper, you find it deeper. And then you get to the point where you know that, wow, this is right. This is valid. So it's a process. It's a process. Somebody once, I was giving a lecture once, and, a lot of kids, these days look at, spiritual knowledge, and they just can't buy it. And so one parent was concerned about that, and he said, well, I just tell my kids you have to have faith. And I said, I can't help but saying that I'm opposed to faith. Faith, there's implication they're blind faith. I'm opposed to faith. I'm in favor of knowledge. You see, You don't have faith in your math teacher. You realize this guy's got knowledge. And like that, you become a custodian of spiritual knowledge when it's not just gone to faith, but it's rooted in a deep understanding. And again, it's not from out in. Out in can be a catalyst, it can help, but you have to find it ultimately within yourself. I'm humbled, really by a lot of people that, look at the people. Before there was enough awareness, enough intelligence, enough intellectual understanding, people just sensed it in the depth of their soul so fervently, so ardently, that they would build these huge temples and dedicate their lives to it. And it was just that inner knowing. And so that brings up an important point too, because so many people have a deep inner knowing, feel a deep communion with God, if you will. The unified field is a sterile way of saying it, And their portal, their gateway to that is their own religion and whatever their level of understanding of their religion is. And so it's not about negating that religion or negating a particular person's level of understanding of their religion, because to them, that religion is the gateway, is the portal, is real knowledge. You see, so we honor that. But at the same time, we want to refine our level of understanding of it. So if we hold on to a superficial interpretation of it and refuse to go deeper for whatever reason, then it blocks our progress, you see. So humility is the flip side of wisdom. Whatever our level of knowledge, we need to be humble about it and realize that it always goes deeper, can always go deeper. And our spiritual growth is about moving past what we think we already know and cultivating a deeper and deeper level of understanding of it. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Yeah, it does. Because and I like what you're saying about, what we're here to do is refine our physiology so that we can, be in touch with that place where all of those things that you're doing are coming from the correct direction versus, like, I think we talk about out in versus in out, kind of thing. So
sometimes I talk about how 2 points, if you have 1 point, you can draw a line through it in any direction. 2 points determine a line. So now you can't just draw any line through it. And what happens when you meditate, when you cultivate your spiritual growth, when you don't base it on some identity, when you don't get lost, because like they say, it's a razor's edge, it's a slippery slope. You can get off in astral directions, and people do. But as long as you stick with it long enough so that 2 points determine a line, and then you stay with that, that traverses the razor's edge, you see? And that's what takes us deeper, deeper, deeper. And once you have made enough progress so that you get a line and you can't just justify anything with the intellect, which people do, now you're really on the path, you see? But even then, you stay committed to it because there are so many distractions along the way. That's why they call it a razor's edge. It's as subtle as progressing as moving through the eye of a needle, So I think, Scotty, that's enough for today. That's quite a bit. Sure. We can go on and on. In my lecture, I talk about this stuff.
One thing I was thinking of too is it's like, I remember you talking about, it doesn't matter what religion you are when you come here or whatever. The Vedics, they don't care what religion you are. They're about making your instrument be able to, in other words, like being a better Christian or being a better Buddhist or being a better Muslim or being whatever it is. It's about refining your physiology so that you can, like you said, those points, you can not get distracted, get offline. You're you're taking the line where you need to go. I don't know.
And you see, we
That's
each come from a different culture, or our own culture, whatever it is. And a culture's the physiology. And so if we align with the healthy part of a culture, because every culture has an unhealthy aspect, right? High end of the low end of the mandala, I call it. But because we grew up in that culture, our physiology are oriented in a direction where that culture can assist in evolving us. And so abandoning our culture, abandoning our religion, for example, can be self-compromising. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to study Vedic literature because I'm, Christian. No, you become a better Christian, you see. That's a good point, Scotty. Very important point, All right, I think that's it for today. We can go on and on about this. And then again, in my classes, I talk about so much, But, these podcasts, I think we give a pretty good sense of, a fair amount of it. Okie doke. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time on Ancient Secrets Revealed.